Marcus Thompson's weathered hands froze mid-motion, the steel trap's jaws gleaming with fresh blood as 5 golden eyes locked onto his trembling fingers. The retired Marine from Dallas had come to Kenya to kill his 13th lion, revenge for his son Jake's death 2 years ago. But the Lionesses weren't attacking. Dr. Sarah Mitchell's scream echoed across the Masai Mara as her camera crashed to the ground, the viewfinder revealing the impossible, her estranged adoptive father dismantling the very trap that had nearly killed the pride's alpha male. Django Williams dropped his radio, his Harvard-educated mind struggling to process the spiritual significance. This was the sacred lion his grandfather's spirit inhabited. "Dad?" Sarah's voice cracked like breaking glass. "What have you done?" The massive lion with piercing blue eyes, eyes that haunted Marcus's nightmares because they looked exactly like Jake's, lifted his bloodied head and gazed directly into the old soldier's soul. In that moment, Marcus realized his quest for vengeance had led him to save the very beast he'd sworn to destroy. How had a broken grandfather's hunt for justice become a desperate rescue mission that would redefine everything he believed about family, forgiveness, and the true meaning of the American dream? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 6 months earlier, Marcus Thompson had been a different man entirely. At 62, the retired Marine Corps sergeant had built Thompson Construction from nothing more than a beat-up pickup truck and an unshakable work ethic. For 35 years, he'd poured concrete foundations across Dallas, each project a stepping stone toward the American dream he'd promised his late wife, Margaret. "Everything I do is for Jake," he'd tell anyone who'd listen, watching his son grow from a scrappy kid into a Stanford-educated engineer with eyes the color of Texas bluebonnets. The construction empire Marcus built wasn't just about money, it was about legacy. Jake Thompson was supposed to inherit everything: the company, the ranch in Plano, the respect Marcus had earned through decades of dawn-to-dusk labor. "That boy's got everything I never had," Marcus would say with pride that could move mountains. College degree, opportunities, the whole damn world at his feet. But dreams have a way of dying hard and fast. 2 years ago, Jake had surprised his father with a safari invitation to Kenya. "Dad, you worked yourself to the bone for me. Time to see the world." It was supposed to be a celebration. Jake had just gotten engaged, and the construction company had landed its biggest contract ever. Father and son, finally taking time to enjoy what they'd built together. The lion attack happened on day 3. Jake died protecting a group of Maasai children who'd wandered too close to a wounded male lion. The newspapers called him a hero. Marcus called it a senseless waste. Margaret's suicide note, found 2 months later, was brief. "I can't live in a world without our boy. Take care of yourself, Marcus. Jake wouldn't want you to follow us." But Marcus had already started following, not into death, but into something darker. He'd liquidated Thompson Construction, spent his life savings on hunting permits, and made Kenya his second home. 12 lions had died by his hand over 18 months, each kill a futile attempt to balance some cosmic scale of justice. Enter Dr. Sarah Mitchell, though Marcus didn't know she was coming to the same place where his path of vengeance would finally intersect with redemption. At 34, Sarah carried her own burden of loss. Her 6-year-old daughter Emma had died of leukemia 3 years earlier, and her marriage hadn't survived the grief. She'd thrown herself into wildlife trauma research, studying how animals process loss and recovery, hoping to find answers that human psychology couldn't provide. Sarah had been Marcus's adopted daughter once, taken in when she was 12 after her birth parents died in a car crash. He'd raised her alongside Jake, given her the same opportunities, the same love. But when Jake died and Margaret followed, Marcus had pushed everyone away, including the daughter who reminded him too much of the family he'd lost. Now, neither knew that fate was drawing them back to the same blood-soaked ground where healing and revenge would collide under the scorching African sun. The Masai Mara stretched endlessly under the brutal African sun, its golden grasslands shimmering like a mirage of Marcus Thompson's fading sanity. At 5:47 a.m., he crouched beside his Land Cruiser, methodically checking the steel trap that would claim his 13th victim. The device was a monster, designed for rhinos, modified for lions, engineered to crush bone and spirit alike. "Lucky number 13, Marcus muttered, his calloused fingers tracing the trap's serrated edges. Jake always said 13 was his number. Died on the 13th day. Some damn luck. The irony wasn't lost on him that his son's lucky number had become the countdown to Marcus's own destruction. Each lion he'd killed had brought him closer to this moment, to the mathematical completion of his grief. The trap sat perfectly positioned beside the only reliable water source within a 20-mile radius. During Kenya's harshest dry season, this muddy pool meant the difference between life and death for every creature in the territory. Marcus knew this. He'd counted on it. The moral calculus was simple in his fractured mind. One lion's death in exchange for 2 years of sleepless nights. 3 miles away, Dr. Sarah Mitchell was setting up her research equipment, completely unaware that her adoptive father was preparing to commit the very crime she'd dedicated her career to preventing. Her camera traps would document animal behavior patterns, specifically how trauma affected family structures in lion prides. The irony was devastating. She'd come to Africa to study how animals heal from loss, while the man who'd once healed her own childhood wounds was methodically destroying everything she hoped to save. "These readings are incredible," Sarah told her guide, a young man who'd introduced himself simply as Django. "The pride dynamics here are unlike anything I've seen. There's an alpha male who's managed to keep 5 females together for over 3 years. That's almost unheard of in the wild." Django Williams, his traditional Maasai name was Lashan, meaning the one who brings peace, nodded thoughtfully. At 28, he carried the weight of 2 worlds, Harvard Business School and the ancient wisdom of his Maasai grandfather. His American father had been a Peace Corps volunteer who'd fallen in love with both the culture and Django's mother. The result was a man who could navigate Wall Street and the African bush with equal skill, but Django harbored his own secret. 3 nights ago, his grandfather had appeared in a vision, warning that the sacred lion, the one whose spirit carried the essence of their ancestral protector, was in mortal danger. The old man's words still echoed in Django's mind. "The broken white man seeks to kill our spiritual father. You must be there when the circle closes." As the morning sun climbed higher, painting the savannah in shades of amber and gold, the lion pride approached their daily ritual. Aslan, 15 years old and scarred from countless battles, led his 5 pregnant lionesses toward the water. His distinctive blue eyes, an unusual genetic trait that made him legendary among local tribes, scanned the terrain with the wariness of a survivor. Marcus watched through his rifle scope, his breathing steady and controlled. This was it. The moment he'd invested everything in. 2 years of planning, a fortune in bribes and permits, the complete destruction of his former life, all for this single shot at cosmic justice. But as Aslan stepped into the scope's crosshairs, something gave Marcus pause. Those eyes, Jesus Christ, those impossible blue eyes. They were Jake's eyes. The same shade of Texas bluebonnet that had looked up at him from a hospital bed 25 years ago when 5-year-old Jake had his tonsils removed. The same eyes that had sparkled with mischief during Little League games. The same eyes that had grown serious and determined when Jake announced he wanted to follow his father into construction. The same eyes that had closed forever in a Kenyan hospital while Marcus held his son's broken body and promised him vengeance. Marcus's finger hesitated on the trigger. Professional muscle memory warred with something deeper, something that felt dangerously like doubt. In that split second of hesitation, physics and fate intervened. The steel trap's mechanism, triggered by Aslan's massive front paw, snapped shut with a sound like breaking bones. The lion's roar of pain and surprise echoed across the Mara, a sound so primal and devastating that it seemed to tear the very fabric of the morning apart. Sarah's camera, positioned to capture normal behavioral patterns, instead recorded the exact moment when vengeance transformed into something far more complicated. Django's radio crackled with urgent chatter from park rangers reporting unusual animal distress calls from the northern sector. But Marcus Thompson, who had spent 2 years planning this moment, found himself staring through his rifle scope at something that would change everything. 5 lionesses forming a protective circle around their wounded mate, their golden bodies trembling with the same desperate loyalty that had once defined his own family. The hunt had become something else entirely. The sound of Aslan's agony carried across the Masai Mara like a death knell, reaching Sarah's research station 3 miles away with crystalline clarity. She'd been adjusting her telephoto lens when the roar hit her, not the territorial bellow of a healthy male, but something far more desperate, something that spoke of mortal pain and imminent loss. Jesus, what was that? Sarah's hands trembled as she grabbed her field radio, her maternal instincts firing with the intensity of a woman who'd spent too many nights listening to her daughter's cries in a hospital ward. Django's face had gone ashen, his Harvard-educated composure cracking to reveal something far more ancient and spiritual. "That's the sacred lion," he whispered, his voice carrying the weight of generational wisdom. "My grandfather's spirit. Something terrible has happened." They raced across the savannah in Django's modified Land Rover, dust clouds marking their desperate passage toward the water source. With each passing mile, Sarah's professional objectivity dissolved into something more personal, more painful. The distress calls she was hearing reminded her of every sleepless night she'd spent beside Emma's hospital bed, listening to her daughter's labored breathing and feeling utterly powerless to help. When they crested the final ridge, the scene below froze them both in horror and awe. Aslan lay trapped beside the muddy pool, his magnificent front leg clamped in steel jaws that had been designed to stop a charging rhino. Around him 5 lionesses had formed a perfect defensive circle, their golden bodies tense with protective fury. But it wasn't the lions that made Sarah's blood run cold. It was the man kneeling beside the trap, his weathered hands working frantically at the mechanism's release springs. "Dad?" The word escaped Sarah's lips like a prayer and a curse combined. "Dad, what the hell are you doing here?" Marcus Thompson's head snapped up, his blue eyes, so eerily similar to the trapped lions, meeting his adopted daughter's gaze across 20 yards of African dust. For a moment, time seemed suspended between them, weighted with 2 years of silence, grief, and mutual abandonment. "Sarah?" Marcus's voice cracked like old leather. "What? How did you... Jesus Christ, baby girl, what are you doing in this godforsaken place?" "I could ask you the same question." Sarah's professional composure shattered completely. "Are you the one who set this trap? Are you the bastard who's been killing lions across 3 game reserves?" The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a grass fire. Marcus looked down at his hands, still covered in Aslan's blood from his attempts to free the trap mechanism. The evidence was damning, undeniable. He was the hunter. He was the monster her research had been documenting. "Your son?" Django's voice cut through the family drama with surgical precision. "Your son was Jake Thompson, the American who died saving Maasai children near the Mara River." Marcus's head jerked up as if he'd been slapped. "How do you know about Jake?" "Because I'm one of the children he saved." Django's revelation hit like a thunderbolt. Your son threw himself between a rogue lion and 6 children, including my cousin's boy. He died so we could live. And you've been killing lions ever since?" The moral complexity of the situation crashed over them like a flash flood. Marcus had spent 2 years hunting the very species his son had died protecting. Sarah had come to study trauma recovery in the exact place where her family had been destroyed, and Django, the man she'd begun to trust, was connected to the tragedy that had torn them all apart. "I didn't know," Marcus whispered, his hands still working automatically at the trap's mechanism. "I never knew he saved anyone. They just told me a lion killed my boy." Aslan's breathing had become labored, each exhale a visible struggle. The great cat's blue eyes, so achingly familiar, fixed on Marcus with something that looked disturbingly like understanding. Around them, the lionesses maintained their vigil, but their aggressive posturing had shifted to something more like desperate hope. "We can sort out family history later," Sarah said, her veterinary instincts overriding everything else. "Right now, we have maybe an hour before heat exhaustion and blood loss kill him, and if he dies, those 5 females will abandon their cubs. We'll lose an entire generation." The choice crystallized before them with brutal clarity. Work together to save the life Marcus had come to take, or let the past destroy what little remained of their fractured family. Time was running out for all of them. The tension around the trapped lion stretched taut as piano wire, 3 broken humans circling each other like wary predators, while Aslan's life ebbed away beneath the merciless African sun. Marcus kept his hands on the trap mechanism, his marine training warring with 2 years of consuming hatred. Every instinct screamed at him to walk away, to let nature complete what he'd started. But those blue eyes, Jake's eyes, held him captive. "I didn't come this far to save the damn thing," Marcus growled, though his fingers continued working at the steel springs. "This bastard's kind killed my son, my only son." Sarah dropped to her knees beside Aslan's massive head, her veterinary training kicking in despite the emotional maelstrom. "If you ever loved me," she whispered, her voice breaking, "if Jake's death meant anything at all, help me save this family." She gestured toward the 5 lionesses, their swollen bellies heavy with cubs that would die without their father's protection. Django moved closer, his Harvard education and Maasai wisdom creating an odd calm in the storm. "The ancestors say, healing cannot begin until the circle is closed. Your son opened that circle when he died protecting our children. Now you must close it." Marcus's hands stilled on the trap. "You think saving 1 lion makes up for losing Jake? You think it brings back my boy, my wife, my whole goddamn life?" "No," Sarah said simply, "but it might save what's left of ours." The lionesses watched this human drama unfold with predatory intelligence. The lead female, scarred across her left flank from old battles, had positioned herself closest to the humans. Her amber eyes tracked every movement, every gesture, reading the emotional temperature with feline precision. When Sarah reached slowly toward her medical kit, the lioness tensed but didn't attack. When Marcus cursed and jerked his hands away from the trap, she growled low in her throat. She understood somehow that these strange creatures held her mate's fate in their trembling hands. "The mechanism's designed for 3 people," Marcus admitted reluctantly, his construction foreman's eye assessing the trap's engineering. 2 to hold the springs, 1 to pull the leg free, but those cats ain't gonna let us get close enough for coordinated rescue." "They will if we show them we're family," Django said with quiet confidence. He sat cross-legged in the dust, just beyond the lioness's defensive perimeter, and began speaking in low, rhythmic Maasai. The ancient words seemed to flow directly from his grandfather's spirit, carrying meanings that transcended language barriers. Sarah found herself mesmerized by the sound, by the way the lioness's ears swiveled toward Django's voice. What are you telling them? That grief recognizes grief, that love recognizes love, that we're all here because we've lost someone we couldn't bear to lose. Django's voice never wavered, never broke, though tears tracked down his cheeks. I'm telling them about your son, Marcus, about your daughter, Sarah, about my grandfather's lion who was killed by poachers last season. The lead lioness took a tentative step toward them, then another. Her massive paws left perfect prints in the red dust as she approached Django with the cautious dignity of a queen granting audience. When she was close enough to kill him with a single swipe, she stopped and simply looked into his eyes. "My God," Sarah breathed. "She's listening. She's actually listening." Marcus watched this impossible interspecies communication with the fascination of a man witnessing his own resurrection. In 40 years of construction, I've never seen anything like this. Animals don't. They don't understand human grief. Don't they? Sarah moved her medical kit closer to Aslan's trapped leg. I've spent 3 years studying trauma in wildlife. Elephants hold funerals for their dead. Dolphins support injured pod members. Wolves howl for lost packmates. Maybe we're not so different. The temperature was climbing toward 110 degrees Fahrenheit, and Aslan's breathing had become increasingly labored. Dehydration was setting in fast, and the steel trap was cutting off circulation to his massive paw. Sarah estimated they had maybe 30 minutes before organ failure became irreversible. "We need to move now," she said, unpacking her emergency veterinary supplies. "I can sedate him enough to reduce his stress response, but I'll need you both to work the trap mechanism while I guide his leg out." Marcus stared at the morphine vial in Sarah's hands. "You're asking me to drug a lion so we can set it free. The same species that killed my boy. I'm asking you to save a father so his children don't grow up without him." Sarah's voice carried the weight of every sleepless night she'd spent in pediatric oncology wards. "I'm asking you to be the kind of man Jake was raised to be." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Jake had been raised to protect the innocent, to stand up for those who couldn't defend themselves. In his final moments, Jake had embodied everything Marcus had tried to teach him about courage, sacrifice, and moral duty. And here Marcus was, faced with the chance to honor that legacy, or destroy it completely. "All right," Marcus said quietly. "Tell me what you need me to do." The next 20 minutes unfolded like a delicate ballet performed at the edge of catastrophe. Sarah administered the sedative with hands steady as a surgeon's, her touch gentle despite the enormous risk. Aslan's blue eyes tracked her movements with something that looked disturbingly like trust. Django maintained his rhythmic chanting, and gradually, impossibly, the lionesses began to relax their defensive positions. The lead female actually lay down beside Aslan's head, her rough tongue lapping at his face in gestures of comfort that transcended species boundaries. Marcus found himself talking to the lion as he worked the trap mechanism, his voice carrying the same gentle authority he'd once used with Jake during childhood injuries. "Come on, big guy. Don't give up on me now. We're going to get you out of this mess, and then you can go back to taking care of your ladies." The trap's release required perfect timing and coordination. Sarah counted down from 3, and on her signal, Marcus and Django pulled the spring mechanisms while she guided Aslan's mangled leg free from the steel jaws. The lion's roar of pain echoed across the Mara, but it was the sound of liberation, not despair. "Got him!" Sarah shouted, immediately beginning to clean and bandage the wounds. "The bones aren't broken, just massive tissue damage and blood loss. He'll live if we can get him stabilized." As Sarah worked, something remarkable happened. The lead lioness approached Marcus, her massive head level with his chest. For a long moment they regarded each other, the grieving father and the protective mother, both united in their desperate love for family. Then, gently, she pressed her forehead against his weathered palm. "She's thanking you," Django whispered, his voice full of wonder. "She knows you saved her mate." Marcus stared down at the lioness, feeling something crack open in his chest, something that had been frozen solid since Jake's funeral. "I've spent 2 years trying to kill your kind," he told her softly. "But maybe Jake wouldn't want me to keep dying with him." The lioness seemed to nod, then returned to her position beside Aslan. The other 4 females formed a protective circle around the humans as Sarah continued her medical work, as if accepting these strange creatures as temporary members of their pride. As the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the savanna in shades of gold and amber, 3 broken humans found themselves united in the most unlikely mission of their lives, saving the very life that had brought them together. And in that moment of shared purpose, the first tentative threads of healing began to weave themselves around their wounded hearts, but their trials were far from over. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and Django's radio crackled with warnings of flash flood conditions moving in from the north. They had saved Aslan's life, but now they all faced a new threat that would test every bond they'd just begun to forge. The first drops of rain hit the red dust like bullets, each impact sending up tiny puffs of earth that spoke of salvation and destruction in equal measure. Within minutes, the sky had transformed from brilliant blue to an ominous wall of charcoal gray, pregnant with the kind of deluge that could turn the Masai Mara's dry riverbeds into raging torrents of death. "Flash flood warning on all frequencies." Django's radio crackled with the urgent voice of park headquarters. "Mara River Basin experiencing unprecedented rainfall. All personnel evacuate to high ground immediately. Repeat, evacuate immediately." Sarah looked up from Aslan's bandaged leg, her face pale with the realization of their predicament. The lion was stable but weak, his massive frame requiring at least an hour of rest before he could attempt to walk. The nearest high ground was 2 miles away, across increasingly treacherous terrain. "We can't move him yet," she said, her veterinary training warring with basic survival instincts. "The sedative needs more time to wear off, and his leg won't support his weight. If we try to force him to walk now, we'll tear the wounds open and he'll bleed out." Marcus surveyed their position with the tactical eye of a man who'd survived 3 tours in hostile territory. They were in a natural depression beside the water source, surrounded by gradually sloping terrain that would funnel every drop of rainfall directly toward them. In a flash flood scenario, this spot would become a death trap within minutes. "How long before the water hits us?" he asked Django, who was frantically adjusting his radio to pick up weather reports. "Based on the storm's position and speed, maybe 20 minutes, Django replied, his Harvard meteorology classes providing grim calculations. But Marcus, a full-grown male lion, weighs over 400 pounds. Even if he could walk, we'd never make it to safety in time." The 5 lionesses sensed the approaching danger with the primal intelligence of creatures who'd survived countless seasons in the wild. They paced restlessly around their wounded mate, their ears flat against their heads as they processed the changing atmospheric pressure and the distant rumble of rushing water. Thunder exploded overhead, so close that it seemed to shake the earth beneath their feet. The lead lioness, the one who touched Marcus's hand, positioned herself between the humans and the direction of the approaching flood, as if she'd appointed herself their protector. "There's a way," Marcus said suddenly, his construction foreman's mind clicking through possibilities. "We build a stretcher. Use my truck's winch system to move him. It's crazy, but it might work." Sarah stared at him in disbelief. "Dad, you're talking about improvising veterinary transport equipment in the middle of an African thunderstorm with materials that don't exist." Materials that do exist, Marcus corrected, already moving toward his Land Cruiser. Canvas tarp in the truck bed, aluminum tent poles, heavy-duty rope. I've rigged stranger things on construction sites. He paused, meeting his daughter's eyes. Question is, do you trust me? The question carried weight far beyond their immediate crisis. Trust had been the casualty of Jake's death. The thing that died when Marcus pushed everyone away and Sarah chose her career over confronting her adoptive father's grief. Now, with water rising and death approaching, trust became a luxury they couldn't afford to live without. "I trust you," Sarah said simply. The next 15 minutes became a masterclass in crisis engineering. Marcus transformed his truck's recovery equipment into an improvised animal transport system, while Sarah monitored Aslan's vital signs, and Django coordinated with the Lionesses through a combination of Maasai tradition and pure intuition. "The females need to understand we're trying to help," Django explained as he positioned himself between the Pride and Marcus's frantic construction work. "In their world, moving a wounded male means either rescue or abandonment. We have to show them this is rescue." Thunder crashed again, closer this time, and the first serious rush of water appeared on the horizon. A brown wall of destruction rolling across the savanna with the inexorable power of nature unleashed. The sound was terrifying. Not the gentle patter of rain, but the roar of a liquid avalanche carrying trees, debris, and death in its wake. 2 minutes, Django shouted over the noise. "Maybe less." Marcus secured the final rope knots with hands that moved from muscle memory, every motion economical and precise. The stretcher was crude but functional, a testament to 35 years of making impossible things work under impossible conditions. "Sarah, we need to move him now. Ready or not." Aslan was semi-conscious but aware, his blue eyes tracking their movements with the resigned dignity of a king accepting help from unlikely allies. When the humans approached with their makeshift stretcher, he didn't resist. The lead lioness positioned herself at his head, her presence providing comfort that no human touch could match. The transfer nearly killed them all. 400 pounds of unconscious lion, combined with the awkward geometry of the stretcher and the increasingly treacherous footing, created a scenario that defied every principle of safety Marcus had learned in 4 decades of dangerous work. "Lift on 3, he commanded, his voice carrying the authority that had once managed crews of 30 men. 1, 2, 3. They heaved Aslan onto the stretcher just as the wall of water crested the final ridge. The sound was apocalyptic, the roar of a freight train combined with the crash of ocean waves, carrying the promise of obliteration for anything caught in its path. "Move! Move! Move!" Marcus shouted, engaging his truck's winch system. The mechanical advantage allowed them to drag the stretcher faster than human strength alone could manage, but the flood was moving faster still. The lionesses ran alongside them, their maternal instincts overriding every predatory impulse. The led female kept pace with Aslan's stretcher while her sisters formed a protective convoy, their golden forms streaming through the rain like mythical guardians. Sarah ran beside the stretcher, one hand monitoring Aslan's pulse while the other fought to keep her medical equipment from scattering in the wind. "His heart rate's spiking," she called out. "The stress is killing him." "The flood'll kill him faster," Marcus replied grimly, pushing his 62-year-old body harder than he had since basic training. They reached the base of the ridge with the water nipping at their heels, the brown torrent exploding into the depression they'd vacated just seconds earlier. But the slope ahead was steep, treacherous, and would require every ounce of strength they had left. That's when Aslan did something that would haunt Marcus Thompson's dreams for the rest of his life. The great lion opened his eyes, looked directly at the man who'd tried to kill him, and made a sound that was neither roar nor growl, but something that sounded impossibly like gratitude. In that moment, as water surged around them and death pressed close, Marcus understood that this wasn't just about saving a lion. This was about saving what remained of his own humanity. They reached the ridge's safety just as the floodwaters claimed the valley below, transforming the peaceful watering hole into a churning cauldron of destruction. Marcus collapsed beside his makeshift stretcher, his chest heaving with the exertion of dragging 400 pounds of lion up a 40-degree slope in driving rain. At 62, his body wasn't built for this kind of punishment, but adrenaline and desperation had carried him beyond normal human limits. "We made it," Sarah gasped, immediately checking Aslan's vital signs. "Dad, we actually made it. His pulse is stabilizing, the wounds look clean, and the bleeding's stopped." For the first time in hours, hope crept into her voice. "I think he's going to be okay." The 5 lionesses arranged themselves in a protective semicircle around their rescued mate, their wet fur plastered against their bodies, but their dignity intact. The lead female approached Marcus with deliberate steps, her amber eyes holding something that looked disturbingly like gratitude. When she gently touched her massive head to his shoulder, Marcus felt tears he hadn't shed since Jake's funeral. "Jesus," he whispered, his voice broken by exhaustion and emotion. "Look at them. They're treating us like family." Django sat cross-legged in the mud, his expensive Harvard clothes ruined, but his spirit somehow lighter than it had been in months. "My grandfather used to say that the lions choose their people, not the other way around. Maybe we've been chosen." For 30 precious minutes, they existed in a bubble of hard-won peace. Aslan's breathing grew stronger. The storm moved east, leaving clear skies and the sweet smell of rain-washed earth. Sarah documented the lion's recovery with professional satisfaction, while Marcus found himself talking quietly to the lionesses, his voice carrying the same gentle authority he'd once used with Jake during childhood's scraped knees and broken toys. Then Django's radio crackled to life with news that shattered their fragile harmony. "Base to all units," came the urgent voice of Park headquarters. "We've received reports of multiple lion casualties in the northern sector. 3 adult males found dead near unauthorized trap sites, requesting immediate veterinary response and investigation team." Sarah's blood turned to ice water in her veins. "Multiple casualties? Dad, how many traps did you set?" Marcus's face went ashen as the magnitude of his revenge campaign came crashing down on him. 12 sites across 3 months. I thought I was being methodical, surgical." His voice cracked like old leather. "I never thought about families." About cubs. The radio continued its merciless update. Confirmed casualties include 2 juvenile males, estimated age 3 to 4 years, DNA analysis pending, but preliminary identification suggests these may be offspring of the Northern Pride's alpha male. Django's hand flew to his mouth in horror. "Aslan's sons. Marcus, you killed Aslan's sons." The words hit like physical blows. While they'd been saving the father, his children had been dying in Marcus's other traps, sophisticated killing machines that didn't discriminate between age, size, or innocence. The lions they'd just rescued had lost their offspring to the very man who'd crawled through mud and risked death to save their patriarch. Sarah stared at her adoptive father with a mixture of revulsion and heartbreak. "How many more, Dad? How many more families did you destroy while playing God with grief?" Marcus looked down at his hands, still stained with Aslan's blood from the rescue operation. Those same hands had set the traps that killed innocents. The irony was devastating. In trying to balance the cosmic scales of justice for Jake's death, he'd created an even greater imbalance. Aslan seemed to sense the change in the human's emotional temperature. The great lion lifted his massive head and released a sound that would haunt Marcus for the rest of his life. Not a roar of rage or pain, but a mournful call that spoke of loss beyond language. It was the sound of a father discovering his children were gone. The lionesses responded with their own grief calls, a chorus of maternal anguish that echoed across the Mara like a judgment from heaven itself. Marcus Thompson, the man who'd come to Africa seeking revenge for his son's death, found himself surrounded by the very family he'd orphaned. The rescue had become a tragedy of unimaginable proportions. The grief-stricken calls of the lionesses created a sound that seemed to tear holes in the fabric of reality itself. Marcus sat in the mud, his weathered hands covering his face as the full weight of his actions crashed down upon him like a second flood. He'd spent 2 years methodically destroying families while telling himself he was seeking justice for his own. "I need to see them," he said quietly, his voice barely audible above the lionesses' mourning. "The cubs I killed. I need to see what I've done." Sarah stared at her adoptive father with a mixture of horror and pity. "Dad, what good will that do? They're dead. Looking at them won't bring them back." "Maybe not," Marcus replied, struggling to his feet with the movements of a man who'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. "But Jake deserves to know what kind of monster his father became. And those cubs deserve to have someone witness their deaths who actually gives a damn." Django's radio crackled again with coordinates and grim details. The investigation team had found the bodies near a seasonal migration route, young lions who'd been following ancient pathways when Marcus's traps had claimed their lives. The irony was biblical in its cruelty. The very traditions that had sustained lion families for millennia had led these cubs into carefully planned death traps. "The northern sector's 20 miles from here," Django said softly. "We could reach the site by evening if we leave now." But before anyone could move, a new voice cut through the radio chatter, one that made Marcus's blood freeze in his veins. "Park headquarters, this is Dr. Elizabeth Hoffman, head of the International Investigation Team. We've completed preliminary analysis of the trap victims, and I need to report significant findings that contradict earlier assessments." Sarah grabbed the radio. "Dr. Hoffman, this is Dr. Mitchell with the Wildlife Trauma Research Team. What kind of findings?" "Dr. Mitchell, the 3 lions we found weren't Pride members. DNA analysis confirms they were rogue males, outcasts who'd been threatening established territories for months. Local rangers have been tracking them as problem animals responsible for at least 6 documented attacks on village livestock." The revelation hit like lightning on clear ground. Django translated rapidly from the radio chatter. "She's saying the lions Marcus killed weren't Aslan's sons. They were invaders. Threats to the very pride we just saved." Marcus felt the world tilt sideways beneath him. What are you saying?" Dr. Hoffman's voice continued through the static. "Furthermore, photographic evidence suggests these rogue males were actively hunting cubs belonging to established prides. The trap placements, while illegal, may have inadvertently prevented significant ecological damage to the region's breeding populations." Sarah sank to her knees beside Aslan, her scientific mind struggling to process the impossible irony. "Dad, you didn't kill innocents. You killed the lions that were threatening Aslan's real family." The lead lioness approached Marcus again, but this time her behavior was different. She circled him slowly, deliberately, her massive body brushing against his legs in a gesture that spoke of recognition rather than mere gratitude. It was as if she understood, on some primal level, that this broken human had unknowingly protected her cubs from mortal danger. "My grandfather spoke of this in the old stories," Django whispered, his voice filled with wonder. "He said sometimes the spirits work through wounded hearts to heal the world. That pain, when properly channeled, becomes protection." But the radio wasn't finished delivering its earth-shaking revelations. Dr. Hoffman's voice returned with information that would rewrite everything they thought they knew about Jake Thompson's death. "There's more," the scientist continued. "We've cross-referenced our findings with archived reports from the Mara River incident 2 years ago. The lion involved in the fatal attack on Jake Thompson has been positively identified as one of the 3 rogue males found today. Dental records and scar patterns are conclusive matches." The silence that followed was so complete it seemed to swallow sound itself. Marcus stared at the radio as if it were speaking in ancient tongues, his mind unable to process what he'd just heard. "The lion that killed Jake," Sarah said slowly, her voice barely a whisper, "was one of the lions Dad trapped?" "Confirmed," Dr. Hoffman replied. Furthermore, incident reports indicate Jake Thompson died protecting Maasai children from this specific rogue male, which had been stalking the village for weeks. The lion was known to be exceptionally aggressive and had previously killed 2 adult males from competing prides. Marcus felt something fundamental shift inside his chest, as if a 2-year-old knot was finally coming untied. Jake hadn't died to some random act of nature. He'd died fighting a genuine monster, a rogue killer that had terrorized local communities for months. And now, through a series of coincidences that defied rational explanation, Marcus had unknowingly completed his son's mission. "Jake's been leading me all along," Marcus whispered, his hand reaching out to touch Aslan's massive mane. "Even in death, my boy was still protecting people." The lioness's mourning calls transformed into something else, a sound that spoke of recognition, acceptance, and the mysterious ways that justice sometimes works through broken hearts and impossible circumstances. Marcus Thompson had come to Africa seeking revenge. Instead, he'd found redemption in the most unlikely form imaginable: the gratitude of the very creatures he'd thought were his enemies. 6 months after the day that changed everything, Marcus Thompson stood beside a freshly painted sign that read, "Thompson Mitchell Conservation Foundation," in bold letters. The morning sun painted the Kenyan highlands in shades of gold and possibility, while his construction crews, recruited from Dallas and working alongside local Maasai craftsmen, put the finishing touches on a research facility that would have made Jake proud. "Dad, the dedication ceremony starts in an hour," Sarah called from the main building, her voice carrying the kind of joy Marcus hadn't heard since before Jake's death. "Are you ready for this?" Marcus adjusted his tie, the same one he'd worn to Jake's funeral, now repurposed for celebration rather than grief, and took a deep breath of African air that no longer smelled like revenge. As ready as a 63-year-old ex-Marine can be for his second chance at the American dream. The transformation had begun immediately after that revelatory day beside the floodwaters. Within a week of learning that his revenge had actually protected innocent cubs, Marcus had liquidated his remaining assets in Dallas and established the foundation. But this wasn't just another wealthy American's guilt project. It was something far more personal and profound. The research facility combined Sarah's expertise in animal trauma recovery with Marcus's construction knowledge and Jengo's cultural bridging skills. Together, they'd created something unprecedented, a place where wounded animals and wounded humans could heal side by side. "The first families are arriving," Jengo announced, emerging from the visitor center. He wore traditional Maasai dress combined with a Harvard Business School pin, a perfect symbol of the cultural integration that had become the foundation's hallmark. "Mrs. Patterson from Ohio is here with her grandchildren. She's been following our progress since the story went viral." The story had indeed gone viral, far beyond anything they'd anticipated. Sarah's research documentation of that dramatic day, humans and lions working together against impossible odds, had captured global attention. But it wasn't just the animal rescue footage that moved people. It was the deeper story of family reconciliation, cross-cultural cooperation, and the way love could transform even the darkest revenge into something beautiful. And Marcus, Django continued with a grin, Channel 8 from Dallas wants to do a follow-up interview about the Jake Thompson Memorial Scholarship Program. The scholarship program had been Sarah's idea, full rides to veterinary school for students who demonstrated both academic excellence and commitment to conservation work. The first recipient was a young Maasai woman named Nasirian, whose traditional name meant one who brings healing. She would be starting at Texas A&M in the fall, carrying forward the mission that had begun with Jake's sacrifice. As the morning progressed, the dedication ceremony took on a life of its own. Families who'd been following the Foundation's work arrived from across America. Grandparents seeking meaningful ways to connect with their heritage, parents wanting to teach their children about conservation, young people inspired by the story of redemption and renewal. But the most important guests were the ones who couldn't speak English. Aslan approached the ceremony site with the dignified bearing of a lion who'd learned to trust humans in ways that defied every natural instinct. His leg had healed completely, leaving only faint scars as reminders of that terrible day. Behind him came his 5 lionesses, now mothers to 12 healthy cubs who'd grown up accepting humans as extended family members. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Elizabeth Hoffman announced to the gathered crowd, "you're witnessing something that has never been documented in the wild, a lion pride that has voluntarily integrated humans into their social structure." The cubs demonstrated this integration beautifully, playing around Marcus's legs while their mothers watched with benevolent attention. The lead lioness, whom Marcus had privately named Margaret after his late wife, approached the podium area and settled into her customary position beside his chair. 2 years ago, Marcus began his speech, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd, "I came to Africa as a broken man seeking revenge for my son's death. I thought I understood what justice looked like. I thought I knew who the enemies were." He paused, his hand finding Margaret's massive head in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "Jake Thompson died protecting Maasai children from a rogue lion. For 2 years I blamed all lions for the actions of one. I spent everything I had built in 40 years of construction work, trying to balance some cosmic scale of justice that existed only in my grief-addicted mind." The crowd listened in rapt attention as Marcus continued. "But my daughter Sarah and our friend Django taught me something my marine training never covered, that healing isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about transforming them into family." Sarah stepped forward, her own speech prepared but her heart full of words that couldn't be scripted. "The Thompson-Mitchell Foundation exists because 3 broken people learned that love has no species boundaries, that family isn't defined by blood, and that the American dream isn't about what you can accumulate, it's about what you can give back." The ceremony's climax came when 12 lion cubs were formally adopted by 12 American families who'd committed to funding their protection and monitoring for life. Each family received detailed updates about their specific cub, creating a direct emotional connection between American suburbs and African wildlife. Mrs. Patterson from Ohio, a widow whose husband had served in Vietnam with Marcus's unit, tearfully accepted guardianship of a female cub with distinctive blue eyes. "My Harold would have loved this," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "He always said the best way to honor the dead is to protect the living." As the formal ceremonies concluded and the crowd dispersed to tour the facilities, Marcus found himself alone with Aslan beside the memorial wall. Jake's photograph held the place of honor, not as a victim, but as the inspiration for everything that had followed. "You know what's funny, son?" Marcus said to the photograph, his voice carrying the easy intimacy of a father talking to his child. "I spent 2 years trying to kill for you, And it turns out you wanted me to save lives instead. Typical Jake, always knowing better than his old man. Aslan made a low sound in his throat, not quite a purr, but something that spoke of contentment and belonging. The great lion had become Marcus's constant companion, often spending entire afternoons beside Jake's memorial as if he understood its significance. The Foundation's first year had exceeded every projection. 12 cubs saved, 50 Maasai families employed, 25 American scholarships funded, and most importantly, a model for conservation that other organizations were already replicating across Africa. But the personal victories meant even more than the professional ones. Sarah had completed her adoption process for 2 Kenyan orphans, siblings whose parents had been killed by the same poacher network that had once supplied Marcus with illegal traps. 7-year-old Amara and 5-year-old Kiprop now called her Mama Sarah, and had never known a world where humans and lions weren't friends. Jengo had married Dr. Patricia Washington, a veterinarian from Atlanta who'd joined the Foundation's staff after falling in love with both the mission and the man. Their wedding had featured a traditional Maasai ceremony, followed by a Southern Baptist service, with lion cubs serving as unconventional flower girls. And Marcus had found something he'd never expected: peace. As the sun set over the Kenyan highlands on the Foundation's dedication day, painting the sky in shades of amber and hope, Marcus sat in his favorite chair on the facility's main deck. Margaret lay beside him, her massive body radiating the kind of contentment that comes from absolute trust. Around them, cubs played with visiting children while their mothers watched benevolently. "Dad," Sarah said, joining him with 2 cups of coffee and a satisfied smile, "Channel 8 wants to know if you have any final thoughts for the people back home." Marcus considered the question while watching Aslan teach a particularly bold cub how to stalk properly, using a visiting child's toy truck as practice prey. The juxtaposition of wild nature and human civilization no longer seemed strange to him. It seemed like family. "Tell them," he said finally, "that the American dream isn't dead. It just got bigger. It used to be about building something for your own children. Now it's about building something for everyone's children, including the ones with 4 legs and golden eyes." He paused, his weathered hand finding Margaret's ear in an unconscious gesture of affection. "Tell them that grief is a choice. You can let it kill you slowly, or you can let it teach you how to love more deeply than you ever thought possible." As if responding to his words, 12 lion cubs and half a dozen human children created a mixed-species pile of sleepy contentment at his feet. Margaret's purr rumbled like distant thunder, while Aslan's blue eyes, so much like Jake's, reflected the last light of day. "And tell them," Marcus added softly, "that some families are born, some are made, and the very best ones are rescued." The Thompson-Mitchell Conservation Foundation would go on to save hundreds of lions and fund thousands of scholarships. But its greatest achievement would always be the proof that love truly has no boundaries, that healing is possible even after the deepest wounds, and that sometimes the most broken hearts become the strongest bridges between worlds. In the end, Jake Thompson's death had saved far more lives than anyone could have imagined, just not in the way his father had originally planned. When Marcus Thompson lost his son Jake, he thought his American dream had died too. At 62, this Texas Marine had built an empire with his bare hands, only to watch it crumble under the weight of grief. Sound familiar? If you're between 55 and 68, you know that feeling, watching everything you worked for seem meaningless after loss hits. Marcus spent 2 years consumed by revenge, hunting lions in Africa because one had killed his boy. But here's what changed everything. He discovered that Jake had died a hero, saving children. That lion Marcus ended up rescuing, It became his family. Those 5 lionesses who did something unexpected, they adopted him into their pride, teaching him that family isn't just blood, it's who shows up when life gets hard. Marcus learned that the second half of life isn't about what you've lost, it's about what you still have to give. At 63, he built something even greater than his construction company, a legacy of love that bridges species and continents. Your second chapter doesn't have to be about managing decline. It can be about discovering purpose you never knew existed. What loss taught you the most about what truly matters? Have you found unexpected family in places you never expected? Share your story below. We'd love to hear how you've turned your pain into purpose.